a Taurus. It's lovely to meet you all. I work for Xero. I am the ecosystem partner manager for small business, which is very much one of those tech titles which doesn't sound like it means much. What it means I do is I look after relationships with app partners such as Tanda and Flare HR and how they integrate with Xero. So I've been working at Xero for about 5 years now, certainly seeing quite a few changes come through, not only in the accounting space, but definitely around payroll with STP, e-filing, auto super and the like. So pretty exciting, and it's a pretty exciting time to be here on the panel. Cheers.
Thank you, Elliot. And Reianna.
Thank you, and thank you, Elliot. And there was actually a little bell ringing, and I thought, is that 2 minutes? Wow, that was so fast. My name's Reianna. I'm the Product and Marketing Manager from Aurion, so we're one of the sponsors of the conference today. What do we do at Aurion? Aurion is a people and payroll solutions management solutions provider. We provide people and payroll software and outsourcing solutions. So we've been doing that for about 35 years. It's one of the things I'm proudest of about working at Aurion. I've been there for about 12 years. Is our oldest customer is actually still a customer today, so that's about 33 years that they've been with us. It's a great team of people. We're based here in Brisbane as well with Tanda, and we share a lot of the same values as well, which is one of the reasons that we're involved in the conference, is that we're both really passionate about sort of getting the most efficiency, effectiveness and wellness out of people at work. Okay, that's it for me too.
Thank you very much, Reianna. And Jason.
Thanks, guys. My name's Jason Daniels. I've been a chartered accountant and tax agent now for going on 26 years. Recently have left the profession, so I was a partner with PwC and then BDO, and I've actually just recently left the profession to actually start a tech company very much around the back of SBR and making compliance data more customer-centric rather than advisor and government agency-centric. In my deep, dark past, one of the things I was responsible for was actually writing the business case for standard business reporting for Treasury, and then I got seconded to the tax office for 3 years for the sins of that business case. So I was actually involved in the development of single touch payroll, was involved representing small business and their interests inside the ATO as they were going through the whole process. So I've got some pretty good insights of where they're up to and where I think they're heading.
So you've got the secrets to share with us.
Happy to share some insights on what I believe
no
they
one's going to share anything
thinking.
out of this room.
Does that also mean we can partially blame you, Jason?
No, there are times where I can honestly say I wasn't as influential as I would like to have been.
Thank you so much, Jason. So how it's going to run is I'm essentially going to present some questions to the panel to discuss. But you do have the opportunity on your Hoover app, on your phone, to type in questions, and I'll keep rechecking them and ask questions as relevant questions at appropriate times, and then I will break towards the end to open up to any questions. All questions, if you're not able to use the technology, need to be on a microphone, okay? So I would really appreciate it if you run it to the Hoover app, okay? Now, my first question to the audience, who doesn't know what STP is? Excellent. So we're starting with a good audience. Reianna is the pain from the STP rollout over.
Oh, that's an easy one. No. Yeah, no, I'll put the mic down. No, so the single touch payroll legislation was very much, the answer is no, I don't think it is. I think it will be extended to gather even more data. I think actually in a bit of a PR exercise plus an expansion of what the purpose of single touch payroll is actually for, it will probably have a bit of a name change to reflect what it is, which is collecting of real-time information from employers. So it'll probably move to RTI instead of STP so that it's a bit more explanatory of the broader purpose of it.
What was the anagram it's going to move?
RTI.
RTI, okay.
Yeah, I think it'll move in that direction, and the data that'll be collected through that format, now that it's established, will increase, as will the number of agencies that rely on it actually for the purposes of monitoring employers, whether they're doing the right thing, which is an interesting notion as well. So I guess one of the original edicts of STP was that it wasn't going to be used to monitor things like non-compliance. I think we can... Don't laugh. I think we can definitely say that's not the case, but I think it will be more obvious as it goes along.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this is government's first foray into big data and real-time data. And we're now a year in with large employers, and I think they've finally figured out what a wealth of information that it's actually bringing to them. The real pain's still to come. SMEs is where a lot of the pain in payroll actually is. And I think that's where we're going to see over the next 12 months a complete restructuring of a lot of the ATO's audit programs. We're going to see a lot more data matching at state and federal level. I'm probably more concerned about what happens at the state level around things like payroll tax compliance and some of the surprises that are going to come out there. But yeah, we're nowhere near the pain being over, and I think we're going to see this program take on a life of its own, even from the original 6 phases they proposed. We're going to see them start to capture things like annual leave information, hours worked, what award somebody's being paid under. It's basically going to hand Fair Work their audit file on a platter. And I've been to some feedback sessions at Parliament House where they've discussed that quite openly as an option. The other thing I think we're going to see, and I'm backing it happens sooner rather than later, is real-time payment of super and PAYG withholding. I think they're collecting the data at the moment to find out how bad the underpayment problem is. And in the same way as they did with vulnerable workers, they'll put a really nice, neat name around it before Parliament and before the Senate, where they're going to be protecting employees by moving it to real time, and that's how they're basically going to lock all that up.
Absolutely. So what's next on the government's agenda? Have you pretty much suggested what is next on their agenda? Do you have any other thoughts on that?
I think it's going to be very much around real-time payment of super. They've now started to get some of the data from the data collection, and again, big business hasn't been the big offender. It's been small business. With moving single-touch payroll into the small business arena this year, I think they're going to collect data for the next 12 months, and it's just going to happen.
So you've suggested that Fair Work Australia, they're going to potentially share data with Fair Work Australia. Do you think the ATO is going to start sharing that data with other government bodies?
Yes, and they already are. So Centrelink, for example, that information is being shared now to stop overpayment of Centrelink allowances, for example. So one of the government's biggest challenges, and again, one of the many reasons why single touch payroll came to being, was people starting a job but continuing to claim Centrelink for another 12 months and then have massive unpaid debt that they couldn't collect. So the idea of getting all this real-time data is all about savings to the government, and their argument is back to the taxpayer.
I think one of the interesting things actually about when we talk about the sharing of data is we talk about the sharing of data between government agencies, but I think there's also, and this is probably a question for Jason actually, as well as other people in the audience who might know the answer, there is the lingering question of how much they choose to share with agencies outside the government actually. I think it was the Deputy Tax Commissioner, so John Dardo, said at a workshop that we were at, effectively the ATO is able to tell if a business doesn't pay its superannuation or PAYG for 2 quarters in a row, it will be gone within a year. So they are able to say it was 100% likelihood, basically. They've never seen that not happen. So they do have, realistically, is it in everybody's benefit to be reporting that to external agencies, like potentially to a bank, for example, so that they can intervene in the case of those businesses positively in order to put them back on track?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'll give you a stat just to understand the size of the problem. So there's roughly 3.2 million business taxpayers in Australia. Have a guess at roughly how many payment plans are currently in place. About 900,000. Now, when you consider that out of those 900,000, a lot of them should be paying super, and certainly experience shows if they're behind on their payments, they're behind on their super. So if you start tracking that real-time payment of super, protecting the employee's money, at the same time you actually start cracking down on businesses not paying their tax, and the government looks like a good guy for doing it, not the bad guy. Whereas nobody wins elections for cracking down on small businesses for not paying their tax, they do for cracking down on people not paying their super. So it's an interesting approach that they've taken to actually solve quite a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just, does it worry you that Kate Carnell said this morning, and research we've seen said 55% of businesses aren't aware of STP? That's such a concern, and 20% that are aware said that doesn't apply to me. Oh. And it's a terrifying prospect.
It's frightening the number of people who actually go and open a business without understanding what obligations they need to meet from an employer-employee perspective, from a local licensing perspective, it blows me away.
So to that, Elliot, how can people navigate the compliance and technology changes in the payroll area?
You absolutely read my mind there. That's fantastic. So this was literally my wheelhouse. I was going to say, well, the great thing is you can get technology to do half the job for you. You know, whether it's things like, you know, making sure you're getting your award rates. I'm sure there's someone in the room that could talk to us about automating award rates with technology. Tanda, is that any good? But on top of that, things like onboarding, making sure people are compliant, and, you know, making sure people's licensing and regulations are up to date through HR platforms and stuff like that. There's realistically no reason anymore that a business should. What was the words that Kate Connelly used this morning? Ignorance is not an excuse.
Ignorance is not a business plan.
Oh, I've seen a few. I beg to differ, but it's not a good one.
Actually, not a shameless plug as well, but we also started. We've just started actually with outsourcing services for smaller businesses, which isn't actually that common from a payroll perspective, but it is totally driven by that. So we have been, obviously, we provide payroll solutions to a pretty big market as it is now, but keeping on top of compliance and technology things is actually really difficult. So without the right tools, I will say fail, actually. And if you're really still struggling even after that, you have to go to the next place, which is to engage experts. You should always be engaging experts anyway. You know, who would run a business without an accountant? But that's because we understand that the job of an accountant is quite difficult and it requires a lot of expertise. That will extend to lots of other knowledge work in your business as well, particularly as digital transformation gathers apace. So we don't generally maybe think of payroll administrators as knowledge workers, but that really is a profile that needs to change.
Yeah.
So it's not an administrative job anymore.
I used to run outsourced payroll at PwC nationally, and nobody ever came to me and said, geez, you've run a great payroll this week. But I tell you what, if you got it wrong, they were the first to tell you. And I think it's a very undervalued profession, and I think it's a very undervalued skill, given the complexity. And I'm finally glad to see that Fair Work have put out a tender for actually codifying all of the 122 modern awards and actually putting them into an XML file and an XML schema that we can all consume, so we might actually be in the ballpark of getting the same interpretations.
You're on it already, right, Alex?
Very good. So,
I had hair when I started this job.
so what future trends do you see in payroll, Jason?
I really do see it moving to real-time payment of PAYG withholding and super. I would like to see harmonisation of payroll tax and payment of payroll tax at the same time so you're not dealing with 8 OSRs and various issues there. I think we're going to see more and more transparency where you log into your MyGov and that's where you'll be able to check your leave balances, what leave you've taken. I think they're going to get very, very granular with the data to ensure compliance.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the things we see in outsourced payroll, I think I was sharing with Elliot before, the guys who came to me with 34 staff, one guy had been there 10 years and they'd never deducted leave from any staff member. And we see those, in SME land, we see those stories all the time. We're going to find Pandora's box out of STP in the next year.
Well, in the next year and beyond, potentially. Did you have something to say there, Elliot? Oh.
No, I was just going to mention that we had that. Sorry, I was just going to mention that we had that conversation and how wild it was.
Sorry, Reianna.
No, that's okay. It's interesting. So going back to the keynote from Taz and Alex this morning, a couple of things that they pointed out there were, I think, are really relevant if we think about payroll in the future as well. So one of them was the idea of live insights. So you can get live insights about what's happening to your workforce. We're only one very tiny technological step away from live outcomes. So there is a very strong argument for the idea that if you can cost what somebody has done in real time, then you can probably pay them in real time. There are lots of, interestingly, the impediments to that are not technological ones. There are obviously huge commercial and social and cultural impediments to whether or not we would actually do that. There's a question of, does that make the workforce more unequal? There's also obviously industries that would never apply to. But if we start thinking about potentially payroll as a competitive advantage rather than as a hygiene thing, which in Australia we have one of the highest rates of casualisations, obviously in the OECD. So you don't have the same opportunities that you have in other kinds of workforce to distinguish yourself as an employer of choice through things like HR programs, because you don't have those interactions with some of your more casual workforces, I guess. So it's what role does payroll play in that? Could you pay people in real time? Does it make a difference in a lot of industries?
We did a really interesting study at the ATO, and this is a publicly published one that I can talk about, where we looked at if businesses were to lodge their BAS weekly, were to pay PAYG withholding weekly and super weekly, what the outcome would actually be on their cash flow. And it was more businesses would actually survive than fail, simply because a lot of the cause for the failure is lodging the BAS quarterly, getting the super bill a week after that, and then scrambling to try and find the cash. What that cash flow holiday does is actually breeds really poor cash flow management, and they'll continue to employ staff for longer than they can afford them. They won't chase their debtors. The average debtors days in Australia has been between 60 and 66 days for my entire career. When you talk about giving people 30 days account, we see people don't even pick up the phone until it's a month late. So when you start getting into those real-time cash cycles, it's actually easier to manage your business and much better cash hygiene.
So to add to that, and ever so slight plug for a project we have called Xero Small Business Insights. We know that small businesses in Australia, approximately 54% of them are cash flow positive, which is pretty crazy. That's on the up at the moment at 54%. Yeah, having a real-time, more up-to-date cash flow would be phenomenal for them. Even when it comes to things like, does a small business need lending? Is there an opportunity here to restructure their debt, for example, and yet chase up debt? And then on top of that, you have big businesses. I think it was 7 billion or 8 billion in overdue payments to small businesses at the moment, which is that's another really worrying statistic. I'm just here to bring doom, basically, doom and gloom. Everything is terrible. No, but 8 billion owed by big businesses to small businesses who are struggling to pay their employees and don't have the tools that necessarily big businesses have to be able to say, okay, well, we can take on more staff, or okay, well, we can buy more plant or whatever. It's pretty worrying.
And the project that Elliot mentioned there is a PDF that, you can actually download insights and the PDF on the Xero website, which is actually quite easy to read in layman's terms if you are interested in this area. So try and bring some positivity into this, Elliot.
I promise, I'll start.
There's so much data and numbers out there. How can a business use that to make profit, to improve their workforce, to improve what they're doing?
Yeah, I think actually the number one thing they can do, which is one of you mentioned, I'm really sorry, I can't remember who, was to engage an advisor. I'm pretty sure it was yourself, yes. There is literally no reason why someone shouldn't be working with a good accountant. I know it can seem like it's an expense, but it's the same reason that every year when I say to my friends, are you going to do your tax return? They say, I do it online. No, go see an accountant. You'll spend some money, but you'll make a lot more. Anytime you engage an expert in advice, then you're going to get a much better result. And at the end of the day, an accountant or bookkeeper will spend years and years and years working on and in businesses to become a good analyst as much as, working through the compliance. And they can give accurate and better advice on how you can manage that data that you might not necessarily be able to sort for yourself. Because, hell, if you get a massive spreadsheet full of all your accounts and look at it, that doesn't really mean anything. But you go to someone who's with a trained eye and the right tools and technology, the good reporting suite, they can bring you back a big graph and loads of other pretty visualizations and say, like, all right, this is your money, this is what you need to get, this is what you need to get rid of, and this is how much you can spend. Fantastic.
What's the definition of a tax accountant? Somebody comes in 9 months after the war's over to bayonet the wounded. The reality is in most accounts...
The doom and gloom has...
It's a handball.
So the issue is, for so long, we've, as advisors, we might look at our clients' tax return in March, sit down and talk about how you did last year after you're already 9 months into the next year. And the number of clients where you would have that conversation and they've already lost another $1 million. One of the things that cloud accounting has allowed us to do is to get real-time data, where you can be having that conversation with that client weekly. You can be looking at their setting up flags to look at exceptions once a week, sitting down actually having a meeting about the business's performance and what they could be doing differently within 2 or 3 days of month end. And that's where we're seeing the whole sweep come back towards engaging with professional bookkeepers. And that's where I see one of the big changes with payroll coming, is a move back towards the bookkeeper becoming a professionally involved in the business and bringing that professional element to the payroll.
Yeah, a lot of people would agree with that. Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that?
So one of the things I'd say about data and metrics, particularly in relation to payroll, is you have to get better at massaging it into a shape that a lot of people will understand, and then sharing it with people more. So it's an interesting, this is one of the areas in which I like to compare, say, an HR function and a payroll function. So an HR person would go to, and I apologise, I'm generalising very broadly about HR people, but they will turn up at a meeting and they will have a lot of graphs and they will be very pretty. And there's a reason for that. It's you need to essentially, you need to justify what it is that you add to the business in terms of value. Now, from a payroll perspective, we don't do that. You know, everybody knows what you add to the business. If you don't do your job, people don't get paid, and then nobody will want to come there anymore. So it's basically, however, that as an idea is kind of changing. You have to build the idea that payroll adds value to a business. It's not just a hygiene thing, and the way to do that is to present consistently to the stakeholders within your business at lots of different levels of the business as well, where you're adding value. So, if, in terms of manager things, you could just start with the basics. This is how much labour is costing you, and this is potentially where you could be making savings. Like look at variances and how those variances were caused, communicate those outwards so that everybody's starting to understand how you can be adding value to a conversation. It's really, in a lot of cases, about getting to the table for payroll people as well. A lot of times it'll be the payroll person is the last person that you invite to a lot of things where they really should have been one of the first. Award negotiations is always a classic example of that. You'll bring the payroll person in after you've decided that you're going to give everybody 5 years worth of back pay, and it's like, well, what? Like we make no money out of that at all. Like, as in the administrative overhead of that is huge, right? So it's actually going to cost us triple what you agreed. So this whole thing is not really worth it anymore. And it's really about having that seat at the table, and a lot of that is about being able to prove that you can add value, and that is always about massaging data in a way that people will understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I was speaking to some lecturers recently, and they said the number of accountants actually coming through university has dropped because they're believing the media saying that the robots are taking over our jobs. But to me, the robots are actually making our jobs far more interesting, and being that opportunity to do that and bring that value puts people in a lot better, an interesting zone. Yeah, you can maybe blame like the likes of Deloitte for that. So they published a report, I think it might have been in 2017, that said that 40% of, and it's all in the semantics, 40% of payroll jobs would be gone by 2025. So I think what they might have meant, but it's probably better for media headlines as well to put it as jobs. 40% of the tasks that people do as a payroll person, we could realistically expect that they would have been automated by some sort of tooling for the benefit of the people involved in that as well. So as most payroll people would tell you, does that mean that your 40% of them are going to be gone? No, it doesn't. It means that you'll be able to dedicate your time to more of the activities that I was just talking about, things like being able to show how you can add value to a business positively.
One of the biggest things I find is the amount of time people spend rekeying data from A to B to C. And so when we talk about automation and the robots taking our jobs, it's hopefully getting rid of that non-value add and the amount of time we spend rekeying data. Australia is one of the highest wage countries in the world, yet as a profession, we spend our first 3 years as glorified data entry clerks. Once we start to get rid of that data entry piece and we come back to decision making and using the data and getting it right, that's where I see the difference in the profession versus what we've done for the last, for 26 years I've been an accountant.
Absolutely. So our Q&A has blown up, so I'm going to flip to Q&A, so I have enough time to get you to answer all these questions. So I haven't been texting home. I have been checking, which I always feel like I'm doing that on stage. So let's start with this one to Elliot. Elliot mentioned the number of real-time apps available to business owners. Is the cost of creating the right tech stack to get information precise a preventative to real-time reporting?
Preventative to reporting.
I guess is the cost. Is there a return on investment in that, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. Is it a return on investment? Well, it's an investment, so it's never going to be an immediate return on investment. That's not the sort of thing that happens. It's the same way as, realistically, nothing that you use that's quality is free. I used to have this conversation with people all the time when I used to sell Xero directly, like on the phones, and traders would ring me and say, my spreadsheet's free. I said, okay, well, what ute do you drive? So I've got a Hilux. Like, okay, why have you got a Hilux? Oh, it's really good. It's like, okay, well, why didn't you go and buy like a 1999 Great Wall, real like knackered piece? He's like, oh, I'm reliable. It's like, okay, well, there you go. You spend money to have things that you know are going to be good in your business. There's no point trying to save money by cutting off things that can help. It really is cutting off your nose to spite your face. I don't know who it was that was asking, but I'm happy to have a chat with you afterwards if you want to just sort of recommend some stuff for the business. It's what I do, and I'm happy to sort of say, this is what you'll spend, this is what you'll get out of it.
Probably the only thing I would add is real-time. The way to get a transaction right is to get it right at its source. The further it gets away from the source, the more likely you are to get it wrong. Secondly, real-time decision-making is where you make and lose money. The further away you get from the data to making the decision that comes from that, which means if you've got to spend a week pulling a spreadsheet together, it could be a week's more money you've lost. Could be an opportunity you've missed.
Now, the next one is what my mother would call a 6 and 2/3 question. Do you suggest an all-in-one solution or an amalgamation of software? So it's one big solution for everything, or a tech stack with a number of solutions plugged in?
I think it's pretty obvious what I'm going to say to that. Xero doesn't offer an all-in-one solution, but we have excellent app partners like Tanda that can assist by adding functionality.
So I'll go the fence-sitting answer also. No. It very much depends on the business and the context within which it operates. So there are a lot of factors that influence that, things like the agility of that business, the industry that it's in, so the size of it, lots of other cash flow concerns. I think there are a lot of, for any size of business and probably industry in Australia, there are a lot of tools that are all-inclusive, but they can always be supplemented by sort of apps and smaller tools that will help you to get the most out of a particular part of your business function as well.
Yeah.
I would add as well that we work specifically in the small to medium business space where the stack is much more prominent, and I think that's the point, is that if you are in the large end of town, you can get something built 100% to purpose. Fantastic. If you're a small to medium business, you can get kind of enterprise functionality for small business money by combining things. Not always necessarily as clean, but you get these opportunities.
The benefit of a tech stack for me is if it's Lego blocks, I can take the Lego block out. If it stops evolving and stops doing what I need, and plug a new Lego block in. So I have a bit of a controversial question here. What's the biggest risk in payroll, and what are the consequences when I get it wrong?
You could ask George Columbaris if he was here.
Oh, I was waiting for someone to mention him. That's my bingo done.
Actually, and there's two sides to that coin as well, and George is on record himself for throwing himself under this bus. You have to take your obligations seriously, and by seriously it means that you have to respect the fact that the law is the law and you have to do what they say, no matter what likelihood you think there might be that you're going to get caught. And the other thing is that you have to be transparent about obviously doing that. So the biggest risk is that you don't do either of those things and that you're not supported by the right tooling, actually. So it's totally a compliance thing.
The other thing I would add to that that I don't think people pay enough attention to is payroll tax. The number of clients I've had come to me, either as tax accounting clients or as outsourced payroll, where the first piece of news I've had to give them is that they're liable for payroll tax. They've either not done it correctly, they've just ignored it as a concept, and it's remarkably common. The issue now you've got with the Fair Work audits is the officers of state revenue are following those very closely because they're in the public domain. And the double hit for George is not only the wages he's got to pay, but OSR will also stump up right behind him.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an interesting question. Do you think there'll be regulation of the payroll provider or the payroll specialist in the same way that there is regulation around the provision of tax and BAS services?
Wow.
Couldn't hurt. Not to be flippant about it, but I mean, realistically, that is really more of a Jason question or yourself, to be honest with you. But I mean, Why would that be a bad thing, really?
Personally, when I've ever been involved in employing a payroll professional, I've always made sure they've belonged to one of the associations. So either the Association of Payroll Professionals or they're chartered or in some way have a professional qualification, and they're actually regularly going to training, and they're keeping their skills up to date.
Yeah, that is one of the interesting things I think about payroll as a profession, and it does go back a little bit to the robotic question that we had before. The difference between somebody who is an administrator and a knowledge worker is very much how they curate that knowledge. So if you're talking about an accountant or a tax professional, we're talking about somebody who will have gone through a level of education, like a whole system for many years, which obviously builds you to a place where you consistently curate that knowledge. Do those same structures exist in payroll? I don't think so. Like, I think we're only now starting to get to a place where we have accredited qualifications for payroll professionals, and I don't know that they're really that widespread. Industry associations, Jason's mentioned a couple, so there's two essentially predominant ones in Australia. Do their memberships cover every payroll administrator in Australia? They definitely won't do. But I think it's one of the steps that as an industry or as a functional category that payroll people need to make, particularly as things like automation start to change the scope of the role. You do really need to become more of a knowledge worker. So it means curating your knowledge, becoming accredited, joining industry associations, really getting out there a bit more.
The other thing I think Fair Work are going to do is come at it from the other angle of getting the cane out on people who have either given wrong advice or weren't appropriately qualified when they were outsourcing it in the first place. And one of your mitigating factors will be to be trained and be part of a professional organisation.
Thank you. So this sounds like a Dorothy Dixer, since the gentleman who's asked it's not in the room. But when will businesses do away with the concept of a pay period and start paying staff instantly now that tech is capable of it?
Where is he, Rod? It will vary by industry. So for some industries, it won't be possible for a very long time. For some, it probably makes sense in the short term. So going back to lots of the things that Jason mentioned before, industries like retail or hospitality, where the cash flow is largely instant, there are fewer arguments against the idea that people could be paid in real time. So I think we'll see a faster adoption in those industries. I also don't think it's particularly far away.
Thank you. So I'm going to wrap up by asking each of you to share with the audience one key action item or takeaway that you'd like attendees to take away from this session. What's one thing that you would like them to take away from the discussion, the opportunity and the risk of payroll?
For me, it's to keep reviewing your processes and your procedures. I've never seen a payroll that is 100% right. The processes and procedures are 100% right. So keep reviewing it. Basically stay vigilant. Keep looking at the cases from Fair Work. Look at what audit programs are out there and what people are looking at, and make sure you're on top of that. When they come knocking, make sure your house is in order.
You've never seen one that's correct? Are they coming to you in a state of disarray?
It might be misinterpretation of an award. It could be they can't find everybody's employment letter. But when we would go out and do audits, you always had review comments to go back. I don't think I've ever had one where you've signed off and said there's a 100% clean bill of health.
That's pretty scary.
And that's me being a pedantic auditor, where you're flowing through the checklist and making sure you can find everything and flow it all the way through an organisation. Contractors, for example. We could spend a whole session just on contractors versus employees. That's an area where I find most organisations get it wrong. They don't even realise the contractors are in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Reianna?
So building on Jason's point there, and it's just a reiteration of things that I've said earlier. Always try and seek the knowledge of an advisor if you can. So it's no longer, payroll is no longer, well, never really has been, but it's no longer a place where if you don't know what you're doing, you can just wing it. There's just way too much happening in that space. I think there's also one thing that a payroll professional can do for themselves now is if you're not a member of an industry association, and that's not plugging either of the ones that are here today, if you're not a member of an industry association or some sort of meetup or just a community of other payroll professionals where you can share knowledge, you should really get out there and join one. So that's probably one action you can take, is to get out and find one in your local community, whether that's sponsored by a vendor that you that has software that you use or whatever it is. It's just a great way to start building that knowledge as well.
I would say that around digitalisation, with 33% of businesses think that the concept of digitalisation is quite scary and it's quite off-putting. The robots are your friend. Please, please, please adopt technology. It's going to help save your business if it's in trouble. It's going to help your business if it's struggling, and it's going to improve your business if it's doing well. It may seem like it's a lot, and it may seem like it's quite intense at first, but honestly, the march of technology has been hugely beneficial. When the car was first released, doctors thought the breakneck speed was going to kill people. It was about 5 miles an hour. It's obviously been proven that technology is our friend, and it is our friend in this place as well. So this is the right thing, time to take it up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Can I ask you to put your hands together for Reianna, Jason and Elliot?